Good to have you with us. For this hour, change begins now, says Britain's Prime Minister-elect Keir Starmer. His Labour Party has delivered a crushing blow to the outgoing Conservative government, taking over 400 seats in Parliament following Thursday's general election. Rishi Sunak has conceded defeat, saying that he was taking responsibility for the party's performance. Eliza Herbert has the latest.
It's being described interchangeably as a landslide, a slaughter and a Tory wipeout, prompting grins from ear to ear in the Labour camp as Keir Starmer claimed his seat and vowed to usher in a new era of change for the United Kingdom.
Because tonight people here and around the country have spoken and they're ready for change, to end the politics of performance, a return to politics as public service. The change begins right here, because this is your democracy, your community and your future.
Exit polls expected Labour to win 410 seats, with a clear majority in the House of 650. The Conservatives trailed well behind with an expected 131 votes in the party's biggest defeat in a century, delivering a crushing blow to outgoing PM Rishi Sunak. There were, however, some gains on the right side of the political pendulum, with the far-right anti-immigration party Reform predicted to gain a surprising 13 seats. But on election night, it was mostly glee for Labour fans, albeit with a touch of wariness.
I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to have some competent governance moving forward. That's all I hope for.
I think it's time for a new future, and that's going to be good for this country. When they come in, we'll have to hold them to account on the things that they've promised to do and probably get them to do more.
In the early hours of Friday morning, Rishi Sunak conceded defeat, saying he had called Keir Starmer to congratulate him and that there was much for his party to learn and reflect on.
Well, for more, we're joined now by Colm Murphy, lecturer in British politics at London's Queen Mary University. Thank you so much for being with us on the programme this morning, Colm. Firstly, what do you make of this victory for Labour, the extent of the victory, really? Is it all down to Starmer's leadership, do you think, or are voters simply angry with the Tory government and 40 years of Conservative rule?
I think it's, as usual, a matter of both, but it's more the latter than the former. I mean, we should say, firstly, that this is a really strange, large majority. So on the surface, we have a tidal wave for Labour. They're getting, I think it's currently at 409 seats. That's comparable to 1997 in terms of, which is another big Labour majority win. However, beneath the surface, it's much more choppy waters for Labour. The vote share isn't actually that high. They're on about 34% at the moment, and they've had some losses to independents, which we might discuss. So it is a big win, but the reason for that is mainly the collapse of the Conservative Party. And Starmer's leadership has succeeded only insofar as it's ruthlessly targeted the kinds of voters they need to win to get over the line in particular swing seats.
But he has managed to return the party to a more centrist platform, hasn't he, following the Jeremy Corbyn years? Has that made much of a difference with voters, do you think?
I think it has, with the kinds of voters Labour needed to win over. So the UK operates under first past the post. It's a very brutal system. So the vote share compared to last time is similar, but Labour have lost votes in seats it already held and gained votes in seats it didn't hold, right? So that's how it's worked. Your question is a good one, because I think Starmer's rebrand of Labour has appealed to some of the voters it needed to win over. So it is relevant in that respect, yeah.
Talk to us a little bit more then about the independents. Jeremy Corbyn, of course, one of them, having left the Labour Party, or having been asked to leave the Labour Party, he's now an independent MP. So talk to us a little bit about how the independents have done, how some of the smaller parties have done, Reform as well.
Yeah, so Reform might be slightly disappointed after the exit poll, which suggested they would do better than they did. The Green Party will be really pleased with how well they've done. They've gained all 4 of their target seats, which suggests some pressure on Labour from the left. The Lib Dems will be ecstatic. Labour and the Lib Dems deliberately didn't compete with each other, and therefore they were taking seats off the Conservatives from both directions. The independents is a really complicated story. And to be honest, some of the scale of independent votes is a surprise to us political historians and political scientists. So we need time to unpack it. I did expect Corbyn had a really good chance of winning because he has very strong name recognition, and Islington North is the kind of seat that would really favour a kind of principled left-wing politician like Corbyn. But some of the losses in Leicester that Labour experienced to pro-Gaza independence and slashing of majorities in other places like Ilford North in London, these are really quite striking results. And we haven't seen this level of independent voting on issues like the crisis in Gaza in UK politics outside of Northern Ireland for quite some time. So, yeah, a bit to unpack there, I think.
Well, let's talk about the Conservatives then, Colm. They've suffered a historic defeat. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss is among the senior Tory figures losing her seat this morning. That announced just a little bit earlier. So what next for the party?
I mean, it's a really good question. The Liz Truss defeat, we should really stress it, is absolutely humiliating for her personally and also for the party. The seat she lost, Kings Lynn, is not normally a Labour seat at all. So it really is a damning indictment on the Conservative Party. Where they go, I think it depends on the makeup of the party. They've been absolutely routed. So it partly depends on what factional allegiance the surviving Conservative MPs have, because they choose who goes forward. The big strategic dilemma for them and the big choice will be what they do about reform. So while reform will only have a few MPs in Parliament, it's had a significant vote in the country, and there will be temptations on the right of the Conservatives to argue that they need to tack right to take some of that vote from reform. The danger with doing that is they have also lost seats to the Lib Dems, usually for being too hardline on immigration and on Europe. So if they tack right to try and attract former Conservative voters who went reform, they might further alienate votes they lost to Labour and particularly to the Liberal Democrats. So I expect the Conservatives to tear themselves apart as they decide which voters they care more about winning back over.
And we're looking at images there of Rishi Sunak. Is it fair to say it's the end of the line for him? We're already speculating or hearing speculation about a potential fresh leadership contest. Who might the main contenders be, do you believe?
Yeah, I would be very surprised if Sunak is anything other than toast. And I would I mean, the Conservatives have run a quite poor campaign from their point of view. And if they considered anything other than Sunak stepping down, I think that would be even sillier. In terms of contenders, well, some of them have been knocked out by the scale of this victory. So Penny Mordaunt, for example, we would have expected to be a strong contender, but Labour have taken her seat. Of the remaining seats, I think Kemi Badenoch is probably a strong candidate. Rick Holden maybe, but I think Kemi Badenoch will put in a strong shout. James Cleverly has survived as well, and I suspect he will try and run from the more moderate centre-right part of the party.
So in terms of what lies ahead then, Colm, many challenges for Keir Starmer. Our London correspondent Benedict Pavio earlier on, she was describing this victory as something of a poisoned chalice. So let's talk about some of the challenges that do await the Labour Party.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, as I've said, they're coming in with a big majority, but on very unstable foundations. That in itself is a big danger. Secondly, we're going into a very angry and polarized country that has suffered for a variety of reasons, partly the impact of the war in Ukraine and the cost of living crisis after the spike in inflation and the pandemic, but also the legacy of austerity since 2010. So public services are collapsing in this country. Waiting lists in the NHS, the healthcare service, are very, very high. The prisons are literally overflowing. They're letting some criminals out early because they don't have enough space. There's a housing crisis that are affecting young people. And we have these really tough foreign policy issues like Gaza, which divide Labour's support and cause significant turmoil on the streets. So, yeah, it's a really difficult challenge for Labour. They have their missions, their 5 missions, which they will try and use to keep them on a strategy. But you can see a number of ways in which that strategy is derailed. because pressure could come from a number of different directions. The most obvious thing would be if a public service literally collapses, Labour might have to find the money to rescue it, and that might lead them into making uncomfortable decisions on tax.
Finally then, before we let you go, Colm, what do you make of Nigel Farage having been elected at what was his 8th attempt to enter the British Parliament?
Well, 8th time lucky for him. It's quite striking because just over a month ago, Farage looked like he was going to go to America and try and help out Donald Trump. I think it's not a surprise given the scale of discontent with the Conservatives from the right. So the key problem for that segment of the electorate is that net immigration did not come down after Brexit. Indeed, it increased. And you also have the small boats crisis, which is absolutely toxic for the Conservative government that tries to appeal to right-wing voters. This was a perfect breeding ground for Farage. I expect he'll be a very disruptive presence in Parliament, a very disruptive presence indeed.
Colm, thank you so much for your time on the programme. That is Colm Murphy, lecturer in British politics at London's Queen Mary University.